On July 1st, 2026, a development emerged that many in Canada had long anticipated, while a large portion of the United States had not fully processed yet. The United States officially refused to continue the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement in its extended 16-year form. This pact, commonly known as KUSMA, governs close to $1.3 trillion in yearly trade across the continent. It had originally been negotiated during Donald Trump's first presidential term, when he described it as the most successful trade deal ever reached. During the trilateral session involving Canada, Mexico, and the United States, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer delivered Washington's formal stance. The American side did not consent to prolong the agreement in its present structure. Both Canada and Mexico had supported an extension. The United States declined. In the period leading up to this announcement, one of the clearest demands coming from Washington involved access to Canadian retail space for American alcoholic products, including bourbon, wine, and beer. This was framed as a required condition before broader negotiations could even move forward, particularly regarding provincial-level alcohol distribution restrictions. The core issue now centers on what this refusal to extend actually represents for the trade relationship between the countries. The agreement itself does not simply end because of this decision. It remains active in form and function, and most Canadian exporters continue to benefit from tariff-free access under its framework. Under its built-in Article 34.7 review system, the parties involved are given three possible paths. They can agree to extend the pact for another 16 years, they can signal that they do not intend to extend, or they can move toward full withdrawal. The United States selected the option of non-extension. That choice activates a cycle of yearly joint reviews, potentially continuing for up to 10 years, with the agreement set to reach its final expiration in 2036, if no further extension is agreed upon. For now, Canada continues to operate under the agreement's protections. The vast majority of goods still move across the border without tariffs when they qualify under KUSMA rules. However, existing sector-based tariffs on steel, aluminum, automobiles, and lumber remain outside the agreement's protections. These measures are governed separately under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act and are not altered by the recent review decision. The trade conflict that has persisted for 18 months does not shift its legal foundation because of the events of July 1st, 2026. What actually changed is the political messaging and the tone of negotiation. Jamieson Greer did not describe KUSMA as effective or satisfactory. Instead, he argued that the agreement contains structural weaknesses that require correction. He identified several areas of concern, including dairy market access, provincial restrictions on American alcohol sales, the Online Streaming Act, and Canadian procurement rules. He then introduced a broader criticism that reflects Washington's deeper frustration with Canada. He accused Ottawa of reinforcing globalization trends and expanding its trade partnerships in response to U.S. tariffs and policy pressure. In his view, this direction conflicts with the trade priorities of the Trump administration. From Washington's perspective, Canada is moving in the wrong direction by strengthening economic ties with Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, Norway, Italy, Australia, the United Arab Emirates, Greenland, and Croatia. The expectation, as framed by U.S. officials, is greater alignment with the United States rather than outward diversification. Canadian officials have consistently rejected that framing. Their position has remained steady and is becoming more assertive over time. Diversifying trade relationships is not a reaction, but a deliberate strategy that will continue moving forward. The issue of American bourbon has become the most politically sensitive element within this broader dispute. It has also been used by Mark Carney in some of his most direct political messaging since taking office as Prime Minister. In the 2026 National Trade Estimate Report on Foreign Trade Barriers, released by Jamieson Greer's office, it was stated that restrictions imposed by provincial liquor control systems significantly limit U.S. exports of wine, beer, and spirits to Canada. The United States is demanding that American alcohol be restored immediately and permanently to all Canadian markets as a condition for advancing wider trade discussions. That demand, however, is aimed at a level of authority that does not control the policy in question. Mark Carney has made that distinction clear, using language that shifts between formal diplomacy and sharper political tone. The restrictions on alcohol sales were introduced by provincial premiers, including Doug Ford in Ontario, David Eby in British Columbia, Tim Houston in Nova Scotia, along with leaders from 5 additional provinces. These measures were implemented directly in response to U.S. tariffs placed on Canadian steel, aluminum, and automotive exports. Each premier is accountable to their own electorate and their own provincial legislature. The federal government does not have the authority to compel provinces to change their liquor distribution policies, just as Washington cannot instruct individual U.S. states to alter procurement rules. In constitutional terms, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario reports to Queen's Park rather than Parliament in Ottawa. Doug Ford has stated the position plainly, saying that unless tariffs are removed, American alcohol will not return to provincial shelves. Within this structure, Mark Carney's role is to articulate the link between both sides clearly, while avoiding commitments that fall outside federal authority. In April, he stated that the liquor restrictions could be reversed rapidly if the United States eased the tariff pressure that has heavily impacted major sectors, including steel, automotive production, and forest products. He made a direct connection between the two issues. When tariffs on steel are removed, bourbon returns to the shelves. That was the framing he used. He did not commit to physically restoring retail availability himself. Instead, he outlined the conditions under which provincial premiers would likely reach that decision on their own. This reflects a negotiation process shaped by constitutional limits rather than attempts to bypass them. Carney delivered this position with a level of precision that was clearly understood by his audience. During a speech in Montreal, when he asked, "Anyone had any bourbon recently?" it was followed by laughter and applause. That moment was not casual. It served as a reminder that empty shelves reflect policy decisions, that those decisions are reversible, and that leverage exists within Canada's system. The accusation made by Jameson Greer that Canada is reinforcing globalization represents one of the most significant statements from Washington about Canada's strategic direction throughout the 18-month trade conflict. It should be interpreted as a clear expression of the Trump administration's concerns about Canadian behavior. Greer raised this point during testimony before the House Ways and Means Committee in April 2026. He stated that Canada is expanding its trade networks, strengthening partnerships in Europe and Asia, and advancing an Indo-Pacific strategy, while the United States is attempting to correct what it sees as the failures of globalization. Within the Trump administration's logic, this criticism is consistent. The view is that global supply chains and international trade agreements have redistributed economic benefits away from American labor and industry. The proposed solution is to relocate production back within North America, and primarily inside the United States. From that standpoint, Canada's agreements with Germany on liquefied natural gas, its critical minerals partnerships with Italy and Japan, its defense industry cooperation with the United Kingdom and Norway, and its investment arrangements with the United Arab Emirates and Australia are viewed as contradictory to U.S. objectives. In this interpretation, Canada is not reinforcing continental dependency. It is strengthening global integration instead of increasing reliance on the United States. Canada's counterposition, reflected across multiple bilateral agreements referenced in this analysis, is that excessive dependence on a single trade partner creates vulnerability rather than strength. The objective, as stated by Canadian officials, is resilience through diversification. At present, the bourbon products have not returned to Canadian shelves. KUSMA has not been extended. The annual review mechanism has begun operating. The negotiations that will determine whether the continental trade structure remains stable or begins to fragment are now underway without a fixed timeline or defined framework. Mark Carney has indicated he does not anticipate major disruption. Dominic LeBlanc has stated that Canada is entering the process from a position of strength. Some analysts believe an agreement could be reached by Labor Day, potentially before the November midterms, when a deal could offer political advantages for Republicans in border states. Others expect the process could extend into 2027. The resolution of the bourbon issue is tied directly to the resolution of the steel tariff dispute. The direction of the negotiation is still open, but its outcomes will shape the structure of North American trade going forward. If you want to stay updated as this trade standoff evolves, follow for continued coverage and analysis. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.